I suppose, it's not often you hear people like me speaking out. I'm at the other side of the abortion agenda. I had an abortion many years ago, so I'd like briefly to share that with you, how I was affected by it. And it's something that is so much today, there's so much against us speaking out. People are not so willing to hear us, especially government officials, etc., pro-choice groups, etc. So I'd like to share with you today how I suppose I have openly shared my story of regret all over the world, and each time is as difficult as that first time. To be silent no more at a public level is a very difficult calling. Each time I relive the horror of choosing to end the life of my first child. I grieve again for this child that I will never hold this side of heaven. Truly, by exercising my right to choose, my baby's heart was stopped and my heart was broken. I denied my child of life, and the realization that my aborted child represented a branch of my family tree, not just my child's life, but the possibility of generations to come had ended. All my child's life experiences were taken away because of a choice, my choice. Today we hear the famous buzzword, freedom of choice. It's not freedom, I can assure you. It's a prison of regret, self-hate, grief and shame. My abortion was supposed to be a quick fix for my situation. No one told me there was no quick fix for regret. Something non-human doesn't become human by getting older and bigger. Whatever is human from the beginning. My baby had his own DNA, his own functioning heart, separate from mine. But I was too young, I suppose, and in too much of a crisis, too frightened, full of fear, to realize that. It's easier to have an abortion if you can convince yourself that there's nothing there. And those who are pro-abortion are often hesitant to recognize the reality of post-abortion grief, because they fear that this means that they have to recognize the death of a baby, which may somehow undermine the political argument for abortion. My abortion was done in a hospital in London. I remember that the doctor asked me how I felt about being pregnant, and I said, I don't want to be pregnant, I'd rather die. I was so filled with fear of shaming my family. I remember my father telling me back when I was about 17, don't ever get pregnant. Don't come back here and bring shame on the family. The doctor said I can do a termination. The word abortion wasn't mentioned. And I suppose back then I was 19 years old, I'd gone to work in London. The term abortion was very new to me. And he said, oh, there is nothing there, it's just some cells and you'll be just fine afterwards. There was no mention of any risks to my mental or physical health. And it's the very same today here in Ireland. I see women all the time now who've had their abortions done here in Ireland in the local hospital, and nobody's offering an alternative remedy. Nobody's saying, oh, you can go and talk to somebody. It's always, the arrow is always pointing towards abortion. The word baby was never mentioned. It was the big problem for me, and now it would be solved. I felt, oh, my family would never know, I'll be able to go back home, nobody will ever know my secret. And it is a big secret. It's a secret that people are so terrified of disclosure. I know it because I lived like that for so many years. I wish back then that I had someone who could stand with me and tell me that there was an alternative, that there was no need to go down that road, but there was nobody there. After the abortion I felt relief, but that was short-lived. I had nightmares every night. I dreamt of this beautiful little baby always out of my reach, always trying to catch this baby, but I was never successful, of course. I remember going into a toy shop and buying a doll that cried, and I carried that doll around in my handbag. It's like I needed to hear that baby cry to remind me of what I had done. I had no self-esteem, none. I felt like I had to apologize to the blades of grass for walking on them. That's how bad I felt about myself. And you see, with abortion, there's no body to bury. There's no gravesite to visit. There are no flowers, no sympathy cards. So the woman must carry this shame and this fear all alone. So later on I met my husband and we decided to get married. I shared about my abortion, but we never discussed it again. I didn't want to bring that secret into my marriage. And the only way of coping was to go into denial. And I carried that shame and that fear and that self-hatred for years. And I remember, talking to Father's Day, I said, going to confession over and over, and coming out feeling fine, but it was very short-lived. So I remember we came back to live in Ireland. I had 3 children. I won't go into detail, I'd be here all day if I did. Coming back to live in Ireland, and I began to get involved in my parish. And I began thinking, if I start doing some good stuff, maybe God will forgive me for what I've done. And I became very friendly with this little sister in my parish, and we started to work together, and she was always applauding me for my good works. So one day I decided to challenge her friendship, and I said, I'll tell her my story. So I remember closing my eyes, and I dreaded opening my eyes because I felt she'd look at me. She was very, very, very much involved in pro-life. And I felt all pro-life people were my judge and my jury. They always talked about saving babies, but there was never a mention of the mother, I felt. So I'd be judged by her. She'd condemn me. So I remember I closed my eyes and I poured out my story. And when I opened my eyes, she was crying. And she came and put her arms around me and she said, don't waste your suffering. She said, let God use it for good. And that was the beginning of me dismantling my big secret for the very first time in I don't know how many years, because I carried that around for a long time. And I suppose after that, I began to share my story, of course, with, in little rosary groups, and eventually I ended up at the RDS, and eventually I ended up in London. And as time moved on, I decided I wanted to speak with women who were seeking abortion. So I did that for 5 years in a little room in a house in Cork. And I had trained in the United States with a group called Heartbeat International to counsel women seeking abortion. And that was wonderful to learn all of that and have that training behind me. But my greatest tool was my own story. When the women would come and they'd be seeking abortion to travel to England, that was before it was legalised in our country, and I'd say to them, I had an abortion. Would you like to hear what it's like for some women after abortion? And they would listen. Now, some women did continue, but I have an album filled with babies' pictures. Those many women changed their minds and kept their babies. But during that time, many of those women coming had already had abortions, and I was wondering, where are they going with all of this pain? Because if a woman has an abortion and she's not healed, she'll reenact that trauma, because it is a big trauma, unless she's healed after that first abortion. You can see many women who are pro-abortion, they can be very angry, very aggressive. They hate people like me who they see as betraying them, speaking out against it. So I decided back then that I was going to move on and work with women after abortion. And that's what I did for 5 years. And during that time I met many women, and thank goodness many women changed their minds. So down the road years later, I heard about an organisation called Rachel's Vineyard. And I was really taken by that because I felt this is something I could work with. So I went over to the States and I trained in Rachel's Vineyard. And Rachel's Vineyard began here in Ireland in 2003. I worked from a little room in my home, and out of that little room I have been invited, I don't invite myself, to many different countries like England, Scotland, Malta, the Faroe Islands, Hungary, Korea, Lebanon, South Africa, Slovenia, Croatia, to name a few. And I've trained up teams in Rachel's Vineyard. And Rachel's Vineyard works, you know why? Because God is the healer. The divine physician heals the wounds of abortion. Counselling is wonderful and it's absolutely amazing, but there's a certain part where, abortion is a wound to the soul. And when the women come on the weekend, they call me, they start telling me a little bit about themselves, but as soon as I say to them, I know how you're feeling, I've been there, I've had an abortion, and suddenly the floodgates open and they're free to share with me because they know they can trust me. So, it suggested to me way back that, the reason you're feeling guilty is because you're Catholic and you're Irish. And I suppose God, in his wisdom, sent me to all those different countries where I met many women from Korea, Lebanon, who'd lost count after 20 abortions. Because it's legal in those countries, and many of them are forced abortions. And I can assure you that the tears of the Catholic, the Protestant, the atheist are all the same. It's a universal experience. The same shame, the same guilt, the same fear of disclosure, believe it or not. We're often told that abortion is a woman's issue. Yet in my experience, I've met so many men who have been deeply damaged by abortion. I have stories of men who suffer from anxiety, self-hatred, shame, broken relationships. They suffer deep regret over abortion maybe that they paid for, an abortion that they had no control over, or an abortion that they forced their partner to have. The tentacles of abortion reach into many lives and cross all generational lines, I have to say. It affects everyone involved in that decision. They're the wounded family and friends, the grandparents of the aborted child, the siblings of the aborted child, and the doctors and nurses. I have had grandparents, siblings, nurses on weekend retreats. And I'd like to share with a beautiful story of a man who came on one of my weekends. And this is what he said. It is said that it is only necessary that good men remain silent, that evil may flourish. Although I do not claim to be a good man, I must speak now because evil is certainly here and gaining ground. That evil is abortion. I know, being instrumental in having my child aborted. There, even as I write these words, a chill runs through me. Over 30 years ago, I cajoled, pleaded with, insisted on, and financed a woman who loved me to abort our expected baby, travelling over to England to do so. We hear a lot about women hurt by abortion, but I must state that it is people who are hurt by abortion. Yes, I, a man, confess that I am deeply hurt and damaged by it, as are countless families, parents, relatives and friends of the unfortunate women. It is high time that we men spoke up and admit that we too can be hurt, yes, even devastated by abortion. We cannot wash our hands of a very destructive moral, mental and physical situation that we shared in the origin of. No woman gets pregnant alone. Therefore, we cannot shirk the issue. We must share the responsibility and the pain. What may have seemed escape and release from an unwanted pregnancy and associated complications at the time has become the opposite. Doubtful temporary relief has become permanent remorse and regret. Each day, practically, I grieve for my action and unborn child. Around days that would have been his or her 16th birthday, 21st birthdays, was particularly upsetting. I deeply and consistently regret the terrible hurt done to Mary, not her real name. I constantly wonder how her life developed afterwards. Yet, afraid to inquire lest I open old wounds and find her greatly hurt and damaged by the abortion, and my rejection and irresponsible, fearful and selfish action. Years later, I married another, and we had 3 children that I cherish a lot, and dare I say, they me. Neither they or my wife know the unhappy secret and racking burden their daddy bears, and he feared they would ever learn. When people ask us, how many children do you have? We answer 3, but always I whisper sadly to myself, 4. A void remains. My ability to fully give and take and fully appreciate adult relationships is crippled also. I can say with a quiet certainty that if one could only turn the clock back to that terrible time, I would forfeit my own life in exchange that my aborted child could live instead. Signed, one of the people hurt by abortion. Now that is an amazing testimony. So today, I have to say that all those men and women impacted by abortion would benefit by hearing the truth proclaimed with love and compassion. By judging them harshly, we're putting up walls between them and the church, between them and God. If we truly desire to transform the world, then we must begin replacing judgmentalism with charity. We must be people who can listen to the words, "I've had an abortion," not with horror, but with compassion. Women are silenced by shame and fear of being judged. So Rachel's Vineyard is a wonderful weekend retreat founded in the United States by a wonderful lady, Dr. Theresa Burke, psychotherapist. Currently it has grown to over 1,000 retreats annually, held in 49 states. Retreats are presently being offered in 375 sites across the world and in over 70 countries. In 2003, I brought Rachel's Vineyard to Ireland. It is a wonderful retreat. I have trained up teams in all the countries that I mentioned. It's a weekend retreat, begins on a Friday night, ends on a Sunday. I urge all of you here today, if you know anyone that has had an abortion, to treat them with love and compassion, to tell them about Rachel's Vineyard. We don't have a big advertising campaign because of the sensitivity of the issue. As I say, I work from a small little room in my home, where I don't have a big office, and we don't have a big budget, I can tell you. It's very small. So it's very hard to get the word out because of this, and there's huge censorship surrounding post-abortion trauma, as you all know. We also need donations and we need funding badly, because many of the young women that come to us might be financially embarrassed, and I'll never turn anyone away. But we've managed on a shoestring all these past years. And now I'm hoping to reach out and to grow and get more young people involved on my teams. We have a team in the south of Ireland, a team up in the west. And we just had a retreat last July. We have another one coming up in Knock. We don't disclose the venue for the retreat, we have to keep the confidentiality of the young women and men who come. But it's a beautiful weekend. And my team some of them have had abortions themselves and are now healed and reaching out to others. So I please urge you to spread the word. You've seen the brochures left around on the seats. Get the word out. We need that word to get out. Most of all, we need the churches to open up and to offer, to announce this from the pulpit, put it on the newsletters. There is somewhere for these women to go and these men, because believe you me, in every congregation there are many men and women who are keeping this big secret. It is the huge secret that you're so terrified of somebody finding out. And I carried that secret for so many years, until God gave me the grace. And if somebody had told me many years ago I'd be standing here, I was the most shy person you could wish to meet. That I just have this fire in my heart. And I know that when voices like mine reach critical mass, things will begin to turn. When the women and the men have the courage to speak out, and yes, I had an abortion. It was a terrible thing, it was the ending of my child's life. So that we can reach out and help others and maybe stop other young men and women from going down that road. That there are alternatives. Every baby is a beautiful gift from God. I have 3 children now, but as that man said, there's always one missing. At Christmas time, at birthdays, there's always a missing link in our family. That every day I remember, I have a photograph in my heart, no physical one, but I always carry it with me. So, I know now that my child is with the Lord, and that God is using me for this. God can make miracles out of our mistakes. He can use our sins to make better people out of us, and I'm certainly a clear example of that. So any woman out there who's had an abortion, don't be afraid to give us a call. It's in complete confidentiality, and we're always there. The phone line is always open. So thank you very much for listening to me today.